So let's get back to Khashoggi. So where does he come into the story for you? Like, how did you know him? Was it working on this?
So we'd known of him for a long time. He was obviously one of the most influential and important journalists in the region. And I'd never liked him.
Okay.
Yeah, he was staunchly pro-government. He was like a true believer in the royal family's stewardship of Saudi Arabia. And even though he was a pretty insightful social commentator and he did great investigative work, he was like, to me, he was the guy who almost got it. And then right at the end, he'd walk everything back and be like, this is why the people around the government are bad, and if they change their policy, they can be fantastic.
He's like Peter Schiff.
I was going to say that's how people refer to me in Bitcoin.
Okay.
They think of me as a guy who nearly got it and then walks it back.
And he was like consistent on that because he was fundamentally a pro-government guy.
Do you think there are incentives at play at that point?
He'd been in and out of royal circles his entire life. He'd
Right.
always had access. He'd always had their ear. He got the stories from them. Like he knew what was going on the inside.
So do you think potentially that was the trade-off? He had to be partly pro-government to have access to be able to get those stories?
I'm not sure if there was a trade-off. Maybe maybe he just did believe that
Okay.
things would have been worse without a strong government in place.
Well, you can make an argument. Not everyone would agree with it, but you can make an argument. Well, we discussed it earlier with Libya.
Yeah.
We've made the argument it was certainly better under Gaddafi, even though the right path for the country is the removal of Gaddafi. And some people would make the same argument about Iraq, that Saddam Hussein was a horrendous tyrant who gassed the Kurds, but it was a state. The country had some stability to it.
I don't think anyone wants to advocate for stateless anarchy to emerge in their country.
No, of course.
But some people are, more enthusiastically in favor of reform than others. And I guess you could call Jamal like a reform-minded establishment guy.
Okay.
He was part of the establishment. But even for him, it got to a point where he couldn't stand it anymore. They shut down a media enterprise he was launching. They banned him from writing. That happened to him multiple times through his career, and it would always been like a few months and then he'd be back.
What was the reason for that?
I can't remember. He wrote something that probably was construed as being slightly less pro-government than it should have been.
Right.
MBS was a lot less thick-skinned than anyone who came before him. So Jamal packed his bags and left the country and never went back. He moved to the US, he became a Washington Post columnist, and he started to do some much more aggressive criticism of the way the country was heading. He was watching these purges of intellectuals and activists, and he wasn't that happy about it. I guess to him, the final straw was that complete loss of any semblance of freedom of speech. And that's when our paths crossed, because we were doing that work on the public sphere. And he was one of the biggest accounts, one of the biggest Arabic language accounts on Twitter. And he was consequently one of the people who suffered most from that trolling and the bots. And he'd comment on it a lot.
Was he popular?
He was pretty popular, yeah, among a certain demographic. He was very well followed. He was like an influential journalist. He always had the scoop, and he knew what was going on.
Right. Was he seen perhaps as a provocateur within those circles?
He was more reformist than most of the circle.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
but what was he calling for?
Slightly more accountability, slightly more taking into account the perspectives of the population, like smoothing the edges of the system a little bit, and like giving people more space to breathe, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Nothing drastic, but good kind of stuff.
Achievable goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can't remember how our paths crossed exactly, but we told Alex's team at the Human Rights Foundation that you guys have to bring this guy to the Oslo Freedom Forum.
Okay.
And we met that year in Oslo, and we introduced Jamal to one of the VPs at Twitter at the time. And we basically started shaping this initiative into something more formal. Like we decided with him that we're going to set up a center that's going to be focused on studying and advocating for the improvement of the public sphere in the Middle East. So people can, like his position was always, all you need to do is give people the freedom to speak and they'll do the rest. Like they'll take care of all the reforms. You just need to give them the freedom to speak.
And how much progress was made?
It was very early days. So
Okay.
that was like May 2018 and he was killed 5 months later.
And, well, I don't want to say we know how he was killed, although we know how he was killed.
Well, you know how he's killed.
Well, we know who killed him. That's quite a brazen move by MBS to
chop
create.
someone up in an
Well,
embassy.
Well, I don't think everyone will know, so I think it's worth going through that.
Yeah. So do you want to explain what happened with regards to the embassy, etc.?
Yeah, he was trying to get married and he had to get a piece of paperwork. So they sent him to the Istanbul embassy. Unbeknown to him, they sent a hit squad,
Was that a Saudi embassy?
a Saudi embassy in Istanbul. So they
Okay.
sent a hit squad and emptied the embassy on the day. When he arrived, they brought him in, injected him with something and chopped him up.
Strangled him and chopped him up.
Yeah.
And do we know what happened with his body?
I think they burned it. I think that's what one of the intelligence reports said. And then got rid of the ashes, and allegedly they took the head back with them.
Yeah, and this allegedly is under the instruction of MBS.
Yeah.
Was any actual direct evidence found that he instructed this?
No, we don't have like a recording of a call. We have a lot of circumstantial evidence, and we also have the fact that nobody freelances in a country like Saudi Arabia. Like you don't do something drastic unless you absolutely know that your boss approves, because otherwise they see you getting chopped up.
But weren't people convicted and executed for it?
They were convicted, air quotes, like it was a sham trial.
Yeah.
I don't know that they were executed.
Can you look that up?
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I'm sure I read that and thought, huh.
Yeah,
So you
I've
go there
read
under
that people were executed.
So you go there under instruction.
But it's part of the process of like washing your hands afterwards.
Yeah.
So the guy who, like the guy who took the fall was Saud al-Qahtani, who was MBS's right-hand man, and he was the guy who was in charge of the Twitter trolls.
Right.
Like he headed that department, basically.
It was quite brazen for MBS to openly execute somebody, a public figure,
Yeah.
with someone he had a known dislike to openly do that on foreign territory. And I know an embassy is considered sovereign territory within a foreign territory, but it's still in.
It's still pretty out there.
Essentially, yeah. Yeah. What was the reaction from the Arab world?
Kind of difficult to tell, because they accompanied that with massive online campaigns blaming Qatar, blaming Turkey, saying that the Turks had done it and tried to pin it on them in order to destroy Saudi Arabia's reputation. The Saudi story kept changing day by day in the weeks afterwards. Initially, like, oh no, he left. Like, nothing happened. He came, he got his document, he left. And then there was a scuffle and he died by accident. And I can't remember what it became after that. These are like rogue killers or something like that.
Yeah. Did you find it?
Yeah, 5 people were sentenced to death for it.
Yeah. Insane. So
But they were later commuted to prison terms.
there you go. They might be in a Kushti prison.
Probably.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about Pegasus? Firstly, explain what it is, because Pegasus was one of the technologies that was used to track Khashoggi.
So Pegasus is a piece of software developed by an Israeli company called NSO Group. This company is staffed by like ex-Mossad, ex-intelligence people, and it exports this software with a license from the Israeli government. So they have to approve every country that they export it to individually.
But that is also insane
Yeah.
that the Saudi government is buying technology from the Israeli government, who are considered mortal enemies.
Well, it shows that in reality, they're a lot closer than it is convenient for either side to admit.
Well, it's a bit like Japan this week agreeing to buy oil from Russia outside of because some specific rule that isn't broken within the rules that said they can't. I can't remember what I read, but I just like there are these double standards.
Yeah. And they've played this double game for a long time of having this very anti-Israel stance for the Arab public and being like, yeah, we support Palestinian rights, etc. And in reality, Israel feels very threatened by the existence of a Middle Eastern democracy. And Saudis are also very threatened by the existence of any Middle Eastern democracy. That's why they're so interventionist in the region. Like they don't want a model for an alternative. So they cooperate closely on these things.
Okay, so explain how Pegasus works and how they infiltrated his phone.
So there's multiple versions of it, and I think the latest one at the time was Zero Click. They would basically get this software on your phone without you having to... No, let me backtrack. The latest one at the time, they'd send you a link somehow.
Like a text message.
Yeah, they'd send you a text message saying, like, your Amazon delivery is scheduled. Click this link to find out the details. And you'd click the link. As soon as you've clicked it, it's on your phone and your phone is compromised. And they can hear anything the phone can hear, see anything the phone can see, access the files, etc.
Okay.
After that, there was another version, which was Zero Click. And they'd do something... I think they had exploited a bug in WhatsApp where they'd give you a missed call. And just by doing that, without any action on your end, you would have it on your phone.
And is this all phones, Apple, Android?
I believe it was on all phones or all major phones.
It amazes me that can happen and there hasn't been a patch from Apple. It amazes me that software can be downloaded to your phone without you agreeing.
It's another whack-a-mole kind of thing. As soon as, like to their credit, the phone manufacturers are generally very fast at getting these patches out because it's a critical security vulnerability. But that's what a 0 day is. Like you find a bug and you hide it until you have the opportunity to use it, because as soon as people find out about it, it's going to be patched.
Yeah. But I would have thought the installation of software, there would have been something they can do to stop software being installed on your phone. But
yeah, I guess it's a very difficult problem.
I mean, it's out of my level of understanding. And my understanding is like almost every government is probably using this. Or a lot.
Dozens of governments have been revealed to be using it. There's European governments like Hungary who've been spying on journalists, Mexico, a lot of Middle Eastern dictatorships, like a lot of countries that you wouldn't really expect from the visible perception to have been green lighted, basically a digital weapon by Israel. Countries that you'd think have like an adversarial relationship. There have also been uses of it in Western democracies targeting journalists. And this is just one tool among many, of course. There are other ones, some of which we know about, probably a lot more that we don't.
So you must then find it particularly frustrating to see Saudi Arabia sport washing their entire history, because it isn't just the murder of Khashoggi. There's serious human rights abuses within Saudi Arabia. There is this ongoing war with Yemen, which is a lot of people refer to as the worst human rights. Some of the worst human rights violations. It's an absolute humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah,
it hasn't barely had any coverage compared to what we see of Russia, Ukraine. I've seen it. I've seen the blockade, which led to the starvation, deaths of children. I've seen it all.